Okay, everybody, this is our first chapter of the Irony book. So we're going to go ahead and talk about a couple of things. What I want you guys to do is read the Irony book and try to, maybe analyze what we mean by what elites do to stay in power and how we kind of have masses kind of kept in check. We don't necessarily want to say repressed, but we want to say, maybe kept into how their status as masses remains. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So this is from the Irony of Democracy. We're going to talk about something called the iron law of oligarchy, which basically means that in any type of organization, there's going to be kind of a hierarchy where we have elites at the top and masses at the very bottom, making decisions for having their decisions made for them by the elites. We're going to talk about elitism. We're going to talk about pluralism. Those are basically the two theories that we're going to kind of use this semester. We're going to talk about how they overlap. We're going to talk about how elitism occurs in democracy and how we maybe can explain this phrase. What do we mean by the irony of democracy? So let's go ahead and go through this, and then let's try to answer that question at the end. So when we talk about democracy is government by the people, and as a result, we have to consent to the government in order for them to be able to rule over us. In exchange, they protect our life, liberty, and property, right? So this is called popular consent. So we consent as individuals, and the government will protect our life, liberty, and property. This is all part of something called the social contract, which we'll talk about this semester as well as next semester. All right. So democracy is government by the people. The responsibility for the survival of our democracy rests on the shoulders of the elites. Remember, the elites are going to be smaller in number. And the reason that kind of the responsibility of the survival of democracy rests on the elites is that the elites need to keep the masses as happy as they can so they will not revolt. But in turn, you also need to understand that the masses are greater in number. So they just have to be made happy enough in order for them not to revolt. All right, so something as simple as that. When we talk about elites are the people who have power. The masses are the ones who do not. And when we define power, we can usually define power as kind of this dictionary definition as deciding who gets what, when, and how. I also like to add a kind of a caveat to that power is getting people to do something that they don't want to do, right? I think that's power as well. An elite theory that we're going to be, talking about this semester it's a theory where society focuses on those people that have power, what their values are, what their demographics, and the behavior that they engaged in. So, just some things like that. Now, elites are going to govern all societies, and they're going to be less numerous. They're going to be involved in the political process. They're going to monopolize power, and they enjoy the advantages that power brings. And when we think about it, being a member of the elite circle, you have certain privileges and stuff like that that don't necessarily belong to people that don't have access or don't have ways of getting their voices heard. Individuals who are elites focus on maintaining their position as elites. Okay, so something as simple as that. You have to maintain your position as an elite. And elites agree on the rules of the game, and in some instances, they need to do it in order to preserve the political and social system. And at times, when we're going to look at instances where elites can change the rules of the game after the game's already started. So we talk about a consensus among elite. Usually there's a consensus that we have the sanctity of individual liberty. We have some civil rights that we have, civil liberties that we have. We have the sanctity of private property. We have clear property lines. We have people that can't encroach on our property, and a limited form of government. Now, this is a very kind of classic liberalist type of thought, which is very different from what we mean by modern liberalism. But classic liberalism is that John Locke theory that kind of reflects off the social contract and says that we give up rights, and in turn the government will protect our life, liberty, and property. Public policy or kind of laws that are put into place doesn't necessarily reflect the demands of the people. It rather reflects the interests and values of elites, right? So, anything that a law that might be passed, ultimately it's going to be off of what the elites want. And that's, kind of an interesting thing where we look at it and see that the people that are part of the elite system are going to try to stay in power. So, look at anybody that's famous. Look at the Kardashians. If you would take away their wealth, if you would take away their prestige and their money, it might be not the best case scenario for them. So it behooves them, or it kind of, in a sense, like motivates them to remain elite. When we talk about elite theory, it means that elitism does not necessarily mean that our masses are being exploited or repressed, but the welfare of these elites rests on the shoulders of the elites and not the masses. So the elites are supposed to take care of us. And in a sense, the elites are going to assume that us as masses are going to be passive, apathetic, and ill-informed. And let's talk a little bit about what we mean by passive, apathetic, and ill-informed. Passive, people don't vote. Right? They don't get involved in the electoral process, and we'll talk more about that as the semester goes on. People are apathetic. They don't care about politics. They don't care about who runs their government. And also, people are ill-informed, and that's self-explanatory. There's still people that don't know there are 50 states in the union. There's people that don't know we have a female vice president. Just kind of those things where people are ill-informed. And in a sense, when we talk about elite actions are going to influence us more then we influence the elites. All right. So, it's just a bunch of, kind of ways of looking how elites will kind of focus on ways to influence the masses, but we really don't influence the elites. Now, when we talk about the meaning of democracy, we have majority rule here in the United States, but we do have respect for the minorities. When we talk about democracy here in the United States, it's the popular participation in the allocation of values in a society. But when you think about it, we have a very limited form of what's called a representative democracy here in the United States, meaning that we elect representatives and they represent our interests in either Washington, D.C. or in Sacramento. Majority rules. So if we have a 51% vote, that's what's going to happen. It's gonna pass. The law is going to pass. Public policy is going to pass. But there has to be protection for the minority. And when we talk about minority, we're not talking necessarily about ethnic minority. We're talking about people that are falling in that under 50% range. So if we have a public policy that is past 65 to 35, 65% to 35%, those 35% rights have to be acknowledged and have to be respected. So nothing can come out of that might violate any type of civil right or civil liberty that the minority is having, in a sense, violated. So this kind of comes off of the, classic liberal theory that John Locke talks about. John Locke believed that individuals possess an inalienable right to life, liberty, and property, which are independent of the government. And as part of that, we form a social contract with the government where we give up some rights, and in turn, they protect our life, liberty, and property, right? So we have to get into a contract with the government where we have certain individual rights, and as part of that individual rights, we give up some rights, and as part of that, the government will protect our life, liberty, and property. Property is important in classical theory because it provides a way for people to be self-sufficient. They could grow crops. They can, farm. They can build factories. Government is a major threat to liberty, and it must be limited. And both our modern liberalism and modern conservatism will have aspects of classic liberalism today. So, kind of in a sense, also to go back and look at a couple of things here. Here are some differences between classic liberalism and modern liberalism, and we'll take a look at that in a minute once I get back to where we were at. So as you can see, classic liberalism versus modern liberalism. We're not going to get too in depth on this. Don't get confused by the liberal part in each of these ideologies. They are different. So just take a look at that. Now we talk about equality, and equality is a very, interesting concept right now where, there's ways that we want to are looking at equality and how equality is fostered here. And sometimes there's differencing of beliefs on what we mean by equality. But one thing that we can kind of get out of this and talk about equality as a whole and kind of an agreement, equality is for all persons before the law. So we're supposed to be equal before the law. So I'm supposed to be treated the same way as a millionaire in court. Now, when we get to talking a little bit about some of these issues, we'll in a sense, kind of find a difference of opinion in that. But as we move along longer in the semester, we'll touch more on equality before the law. We have to have equal equality. One person, one vote. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into voting. And equality of opportunity. The government should ensure that there's no barriers if we want to be successful in life. They should cultivate and be able to not allow any type of barriers for us to succeed. Now, this is different than equality of outcome, which we'll get into more down the line when we talk about civil rights and civil liberties. The founders believed that government rested on the consent of the governed and envisioned decision-making being made by representatives of the people. And this is kind of a way that the government that started in 1776 and kind of evolved to 1787 and 1791 and then all the way until now. The founders believed that they didn't want ordinary citizens to make decisions. So we wanted to have people that were representative of us as a people who would vote for our best interest in DC based off of what was best for us. But, that's kind of gone a little bit out of whack, I guess, when we can kind of talk about that. Representatives in Congress sometimes may vote for what's in their own best self-interest as opposed to what our interest is. Direct democracy, will have our own section about that in a bit. Remember, direct democracy is a mechanism that we'll have in California, and we'll talk more about that in a later chapter. But just as a whole, the United States Constitution doesn't have a provision for direct democracy, and it would be not really possible to have direct democracy nationwide. And we'll talk about those reasons why. Now, when we talk about rule by the consent of the masses through institution of representation, well, that'll inevitably lead to elitism because those people that are in charge are going to be elites, right? They have power. They have ways to influence people. They can withhold resources or even give resources. So the democratic process that comes out of elections is a very key part because the people in power can decide who gets what, when, and how. So, when we usually talk about mass support for government, this is just kind of a quick, kind of a line graph that shows where, traditionally trust in government has gone down since the 60s, whether it's scandals or wars or economic catastrophes or terrorist attacks. These are all things that could definitely have people start questioning their government. And one thing I want you guys to do is also question your government, right? Nothing wrong with that. One of the most probably the most American things to do. Now, when we talk about kind of this elite model versus pluralist model, we'll talk a little bit about the differences of that. Remember, power is going to be concentrated in the hands of a small elite, and masses have real opportunity to circulate to the top, but a lot of the time that involves, maybe creating some type of technology or, generating some type of wealth. Now, when we talk about pluralism, a little bit different than what elitism is. Remember, pluralism is the belief that democratic values can be preserved, that elites or maybe even different areas of a country, representatives can determine public policy through bargaining and compromise. Voters will make meaningful choices in their elections, and you can get an access to the elite system through this. Now, when we talk about an example of this, pluralism is a belief that mass participation is not possible. So you have decision making that are made through different types of groups, and the elites representing those groups. There's kind of a belief that countervailing centers of elite powers can check each other, and we'll talk about the system of checks and balances, and you guys probably already know a lot about that, and they keep each interest from abusing its power. And I always like to use Wakanda as an example of pluralism. If you look at this scene from Black Panther, there are different tribes being represented in a meeting with King T'Challa, right? So each of these groups are going to bargain for what their group needs and what their group should expect. So I always thought this was a good illustration. So if you look at the movie Black Panther, that scene where the tribes are coming together and talking about public policy is a classic example of pluralism. Now here's a little side-by-side. Know the differences between elitism and pluralism and be able to define them. Now, we do have instances where there might be threats to democracy, right? Sometimes people might have power that might be a little too concentrated, but at times we're subject to mass unrest, and we're vulnerable to appeals to intolerance, racial hatred, anti-intellectualism, looking down on classes, and anti-religion bias and violence. We also have individuals that might be demagogues who are mass-oriented leaders who seek to diminish or delegitimize the system. Democratic values can only survive in the absence of mass political action, so that's why elites need to keep the masses in check, because remember, there's going to be more numbers of masses than there are going to be elites, and conceivably the masses can take over. But remember, the masses are very vulnerable to what the terms I have up on this first point are. If you look at some of the videos that have been coming out of some of these school boards where people are going, about these anti-mass policies and stuff like that, I can totally respect the point of view, but sometimes these points of view don't really come off as well researched. And, we all have a differencing of opinion, but there is a saying is man and woman are rational, but people aren't. And I think when we get together, a lot of this stuff can happen. Mass unrest inspires elite repression. At times, we can have our speech, our First Amendment rights repressed. But at times, even in the times of Lincoln, who's one of the more revered presidents, there's a genuine belief that it's necessary at times to preserve democratic values and limit repression or repress individuals in order to preserve those values. All societies are governed by elites. Elite theory seeks to explain the way elites function in a democracy, and this is gonna be kind of the theme that we go through during this semester, and how elites stay in power. And I know a lot of people are focusing on the fact that maybe we should have a more egalitarian, in some instances, people don't like the S word, but maybe a little bit more of a socialistic society. We'll get into that and talk a lot about that during the semester. Okay, thanks a lot.